A millionaire abandoned his own child to protect his reputation. But years later, fate delivers a punishment money can't fix. The sleek car glided through the empty streets, its headlights carving a path through the stillness of the night. Johann Frank Trump gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale against the soft leather. From the back seat, the faint cry of the infant pierced the quiet, a sound too fragile for the weight it carried. He tried to block it out, but it seeped into him, weaving through his thoughts like a thread pulling taut. "Just a little longer," he whispered to himself, his voice low and strained. His gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the small bundle wrapped in a plain, thin blanket. The child's cries softened for a moment, as if sensing his conflicted gaze. The memories of his affair with Kate, his maid, came unbidden. Kate's smile, her voice, her quiet determination despite the boundaries of her station. He remembered the way she had held on to hope, even when it became clear she wouldn't survive the childbirth. And now, her daughter, their daughter, lay behind him, a fragile reminder of what he had tried to bury. But Charlotte's image loomed large in his mind, her laughter, her presence that filled every room with elegance and certainty. Charlotte, the senator's daughter. She was his future, his salvation. Marrying her would cement his standing, connect him to power and wealth beyond imagination. He clenched his jaw. "This is for the best," he told himself again, willing the words to harden his resolve. He looked in the rearview mirror, catching the reflection of his own face, pale and strained. "This is the right thing," he muttered, as if repeating it enough times would make it true. The road ahead grew darker as he turned onto a gravel path lined with tall, shadowy trees. Johann parked the car and stepped out, the cold air biting through his coat. His breath clouded before him as he walked to the passenger door and opened it. Inside, the baby girl lay wrapped in a thin blanket, her tiny fists trembling against the chill. For a moment, he hesitated. Her eyes fluttered open, soft and unknowing, staring at him with a trust he didn't deserve. "Don't look at me like that," he murmured, his voice cracking. His hands fumbled as he pulled out the small silver necklace Kate had left behind, a keepsake she'd cherished. Gently, he fastened it around the baby's neck, the charm glinting faintly under the pale moonlight. He cradled the child, feeling her warmth seep through the fabric into his arms. For a fleeting second, a primal instinct tugged at him, an urge to protect, to hold on. But then, the cold voice of reason returned. "She deserves more than this, more than me." He spoke the words aloud, as if hearing them might dull the pain in his chest. Johann knelt and placed the infant on a soft patch of grass by the roadside. The child let out a faint whimper, her small body shifting under the blanket. He crouched lower, his shadow falling over her like a reluctant goodbye. Her eyes opened again, wide and innocent, reflecting his guilt like a mirror he couldn't escape. For a fleeting moment, his hand hovered over her, as if he might take her back, but his resolve hardened. "You'll thank me one day," he whispered, the words bitter on his tongue. "You deserve a real family, not a father ashamed of you." He turned abruptly, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked back to the car. The cries grew softer with each step, blending into the night until silence reclaimed the air. He slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling as he started the engine. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness, but the image of the child's face burned in his mind. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have, each mile heavier than the last. When he pulled into the driveway of his grand estate, The sight of the warmly lit windows and the silhouette of Charlotte moving inside momentarily eased the weight pressing on his chest. Charlotte greeted him at the door, her smile radiant as she leaned in for a kiss. "You're home," she said, her voice light and filled with affection. "I am," Johann replied, forcing a smile as he stepped inside, shedding the night's cold along with his coat. Charlotte linked her arm through his, leading him toward the living room. "I've been thinking about the flower arrangements for the wedding," she began, her excitement bubbling over. "I know you said white roses, but what if we added some lilies too? They symbolize purity, you know." Johann nodded absently, letting her words wash over him. She continued talking, her voice a soothing hum in the background. But his thoughts were elsewhere, trapped on a dark road under the watchful gaze of the stars, where a tiny girl lay beneath the weight of his mistakes. "Are you all right, darling?" Charlotte's voice broke through his reverie, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I'm fine," he lied, the practiced ease of years spent hiding his true self. And as Charlotte turned her attention back to the wedding details, Johann settled into the role of the perfect fiancé, burying the truth in the deepest corners of his heart, where he hoped it might never surface. The storm had turned the road into a treacherous river of mud and swirling rain. Julia's thin coat did little to keep her warm as she struggled against the relentless wind, her work-worn shoes slipping on the uneven ground. She had just finished her shift cleaning offices and was heading home when a sound stopped her in her tracks. A faint, pitiful cry. She paused, straining her ears against the howling storm. There it was again, unmistakable. A baby's cry. Julia's heart clenched. Who would leave a child out in this weather? Shielding her eyes from the rain, she peered into the darkness and spotted a small bundle by the roadside, partially hidden by a cluster of bushes. Without a second thought, she rushed forward. The rain soaked her to the bone as she knelt beside the tiny figure. The child was wrapped in a thin blanket, its frail body shivering with the cold. Julia's hands, calloused from years of hard labor, trembled as she gently picked up the baby. The child's cry weakened, and Julia knew she had no time to waste. When she reached her modest home, a two-room shack on the outskirts of the city, she lit the small wood stove and set about warming the baby. The child's skin was pale, her breaths shallow. Julia worked quickly, wrapping the girl in her last good blanket and holding her close to her chest, willing her own body heat to pass into the tiny form. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking the child as tears mixed with the rain still clinging to her face. In the days that followed, Julia grew more attached to the child. The little girl's eyes, wide and bright, even in their fragility, seemed to fill the empty spaces in Julia's heart. It had been 3 years since the car accident that had taken her husband and son. The memory of that night still haunted her, but now, holding this child, something shifted. Julia named the baby Angel. "You're my little angel," she murmured one night, watching the baby sleep. "Heaven sent you to me, didn't it? To remind me how to love again." But Julia's happiness was short-lived. Days turned to weeks, and though Angel grew stronger, Julia began to notice something wasn't right. The baby's breathing would become shallow at times, her lips tinged with blue. A visit to the local clinic revealed that Angel suffered from a congenital heart defect. The doctor's tone was gentle but firm. "She'll need surgery, and soon. Without it." His voice trailed off, but Julia didn't need him to finish. Julia wasn't one to sit idle. She poured herself into finding a solution despite her meager savings. Every spare moment outside her shifts was spent talking to neighbors, churches, and community centers. She knocked on doors and spoke with anyone who would listen, telling Angel's story with all the passion and desperation of a mother fighting for her child. Her efforts bore fruit, slowly but surely. Donations trickled in, coins from children, a few crumpled bills from strangers, even a small check from her landlord, who rarely showed such kindness. Julia kept a running tally in a notebook, each contribution recorded with gratitude. The city buzzed with her determination, and soon Angel's story spread. Julia's friends at the diner organized bake sales, while a local church hosted a charity concert. It seemed everyone was pitching in to help the woman who had so little, but gave so much. Months later, Julia stood outside the hospital, clutching Angel tightly. The surgery was scheduled, and the funds were barely enough to cover it. She whispered a silent prayer as the nurse took the baby from her arms. The hours dragged on. Julia paced the waiting room, her hands clasped tightly as if holding them still could keep her heart from shattering. When the surgeon finally emerged, his smile was all the answer she needed. "The surgery was a success," he said, and Julia collapsed into a chair, her tears flowing freely. But the relief was fleeting. The physical toll of months of endless work and sleepless nights had left her exhausted. She ignored the faint dizziness at first, chalking it up to nerves, but it persisted. Soon, even simple tasks became difficult. Julia didn't care. Angel was thriving now, her cheeks rosy and her laughter filling the tiny apartment with life. To Julia, it was all worth it, even as her own health began to falter. She told no one about the growing weakness in her chest, the shortness of breath that crept in during quiet moments. One night, as Angel slept soundly in her crib, Julia sat by the window, gazing out at the stars. She clutched the silver chain that had come with the child, her lips moving in silent thanks. "You were my miracle, Angel," she whispered, "and if I have to give everything for you, I'll do it gladly." Her words faded into the stillness, but her resolve remained firm. Julia had given Angel a second chance at life, even as her own strength quietly ebbed away. The sun cast a pale light through the cracks in the tin roof, tracing soft patterns on the worn wooden floor of their modest home. Angel sat cross-legged, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, her brow furrowed over a tattered schoolbook. At 16, she had developed a quiet determination that belied her years. The lessons came slowly, but she pressed on, repeating words aloud to herself. Across the small room, Julia sat in a faded armchair, her knitting needles clicking steadily, though her hands trembled more these days. "You'll wear out that pencil before you finish, Angel," Julia teased gently, her voice thin but warm. Angel smiled, setting the book down. "Not if I get it right this time." Julia's laugh was soft, almost a sigh. Her eyes, lined with years of worry and sleepless nights, lingered on Angel, with a mixture of pride and sorrow. This girl had grown so much under her care, yet the weight of their circumstances pressed heavier with each passing year. The days had grown longer, not because of the sun, but because of the mounting hardships. Julia's health was failing, and though she never spoke of it, Angel noticed the way her mother's breaths came shorter, her steps slower. She'd caught Julia coughing into her handkerchief one morning, the specks of red, an unspoken warning. "Let me take on more work," Angel said one evening as they prepared the thin stew that would be their supper. Julia paused, leaning against the counter for support. "Your work is here, in those books. You'll make a life beyond these walls, Angel. I won't let you give that up." "But, Mama—" "No," Julia interrupted, her voice firmer than it had been in months. "I won't hear of it." Angel didn't argue further, but the resolve in her heart hardened. She couldn't sit idly by while Julia weakened before her eyes. Quietly, she found small jobs around the neighborhood, cleaning, carrying groceries, anything that could bring in a little extra money. The first time Julia discovered Angel hadn't gone to school, she was furious. "Do you think I sacrificed all these years so you could throw it away?" she demanded, tears glistening in her eyes. Angel, standing in the doorway with dirt-streaked hands, lowered her gaze. "I just want to help." Julia's anger melted into despair, and she pulled Angel into an embrace. "I know, my darling, but you must dream beyond this." The tension between them lingered, but their bond remained unshaken. They shared everything, meals, laughter, and the quiet moments of prayer before bed. Yet, despite the love they had, Angel felt a void that words couldn't fill. She often fingered the small silver medallion that hung around her neck, engraved with the name Kate. One night, as the wind howled outside, Angel finally voiced the question that had haunted her for years. "Mama, who was she?" Julia hesitated, her frail hands folded in her lap. "Your mother," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "was someone who loved you deeply. She couldn't keep you, but that doesn't mean she didn't care." The answer only stirred more questions, but Angel didn't press. She knew Julia had her reasons for holding back. As winter approached, Julia's condition worsened. She spent most days confined to her chair, the knitting forgotten as she grew too weak to hold the needles. Angel worked tirelessly, but no amount of effort could stave off the inevitable. One cold afternoon, Angel returned home to find Julia struggling to breathe. She rushed to her side, cradling her in trembling arms. "Angel," Julia whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need you to listen." "I'm here, Mama," Angel choked, tears streaming down her face. Julia reached for the medallion around Angel's neck, her fingers brushing against it. "Find out where you came from. You deserve to know. Promise me, my darling." Angel nodded, unable to speak. With her final breath, Julia smiled, her hand resting over Angel's heart. "You've always been my greatest blessing." That night, as the snow fell silently outside, Angel sat alone by the flickering candlelight, the medallion cool against her palm. In its simple inscription, she found both a mystery and a purpose. Kate. "I promise, Mama," she whispered into the stillness. Angel adjusted the frayed strap of her worn-out backpack, her sole companion in a world that had turned unkind. The bitter wind nipped at her face as she trudged through the streets, her shoes, 2 sizes too small, pinching with every step. Her once warm and modest home was gone, swallowed by the mounting hospital bills left behind after Julia's passing. Now the sidewalks were her floor and the stars were her ceiling. The city was both a haven and a torment. Its sprawling alleys and bustling avenues offered anonymity, but also a constant reminder of her isolation. Angel had learned to move quickly through the streets, avoiding the eyes of passers-by who either pitied her or pretended she didn't exist. The metallic cold of the medallion around her neck was her only comfort. Often her fingers would brush against it beneath her threadbare coat, and she'd close her eyes, imagining Julia's voice, soft and reassuring. "You're stronger than this, my love." One night, as the streetlights flickered weakly above her, Angel settled into a small corner under a store awning. The concrete was unforgiving, but she had found a few discarded newspapers to act as a barrier against the biting cold. She carefully unwrapped a stale sandwich she had managed to save from a kind baker earlier that day. Just as she took her first bite, a faint sound caught her attention, a rustling, followed by a stifled sob. Across the street, a boy, no older than 10, was rifling through a trash bin. His movements were frantic, his thin arms trembling in the icy air. Angel hesitated, her stomach growling as she glanced at her meager meal. The choice wasn't easy, but Julia's teachings echoed in her mind. We only have what we're willing to share. "Hey," Angel called softly, careful not to startle him. The boy froze, his eyes wide with fear, as he clutched a half-eaten piece of bread covered in grime. "I'm not going to hurt you," she added, holding up her hands. Slowly, the boy stepped closer, his ragged clothes hanging loosely on his frail frame. Angel broke the sandwich in half and offered him the larger piece. "Here," she said with a small smile. "Eat. It's not much, but it's clean." The boy hesitated before grabbing the food, devouring it as though he hadn't eaten in days. Angel watched silently, her heart heavy. "What's your name?" she asked after a moment. "Luis," he mumbled through a mouthful, his voice barely audible. "Well, Luis, it looks like tonight's not so bad after all," Angel said, trying to lighten the mood. He managed a faint smile, his eyes glistening with gratitude. Later that week, Angel encountered an elderly woman shivering under a makeshift shelter of cardboard boxes. Her frail hands clutched a broken umbrella, useless against the relentless drizzle. Angel approached cautiously, noticing how the woman's lips trembled, both from the cold and from years of hardship etched into her weary face. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here in this weather," Angel said gently, kneeling beside her. The woman looked up, her expression a mix of pride and vulnerability. "Got nowhere else to go, dear," she replied, her voice raspy. "Used to have a home, a family, but life has a funny way of taking what you love most." Angel nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. Without a second thought, she took off her scarf, a thin but warm piece she had been given months ago, and draped it over the woman's shoulders. "Here, it's not much, but it'll help." The woman's eyes welled with tears. "Bless you, child," she whispered. Angel's days blended into nights, each one marked by small encounters like these. She met people who had once been teachers, workers, even musicians, now reduced to wandering the streets. Their stories were different, yet the pain was the same. A loss, a tragedy, a single moment that unraveled their lives. Through it all, the medallion stayed close to her heart. Late at night, when the world felt unbearably heavy, she would trace its intricate design, imagining the life it symbolized, the life she longed to understand. It was her beacon, a reminder that somewhere out there her story wasn't finished. And so, Angel continued, step by step, through the harsh streets that threatened to break her. But within her, a quiet resolve grew stronger, to survive, to endure, and to one day uncover the truth behind the silver medallion that kept her going. The rain pelted against the tall windows of Johann's penthouse, its steady rhythm filling the void left by silence. He stood by the window, his figure dimly illuminated by the city lights. The reflection staring back at him bore little resemblance to the man he once was. Johann had always considered himself invincible, wealthy, powerful, untouchable. Now his shoulders sagged under the weight of years and regrets. The marriage with Charlotte had ended years ago, a casualty of too many secrets and too little trust. There were no children to soften the blow, no legacy to bind them together. Johann had walked away with his wealth intact, but the price had been steep, loneliness and a gnawing emptiness he couldn't fill. The doctor's words from earlier that day echoed in his mind, louder than the storm outside. "Mr. Trump, the condition is advanced. Without a compatible marrow donor, there's little we can do." "Compatible?" Johann had asked, though he already knew the answer. A relative, ideally a child or sibling. I recommend beginning the search immediately. There was no child, or at least none that Charlotte or anyone else knew of. But Johann knew better. The memory of that rainy night, decades ago, began to surface. He hadn't thought about it in years, had deliberately buried it under layers of ambition and denial. The wail of the infant, muffled by the wind, played in his mind like a broken record. He had left her there, wrapped in a thin blanket, with nothing but Kate's silver pendant around her neck. It was the only mark of her origin, the only connection to the life he'd cast away. Johann turned from the window and sank into the leather armchair by the fire. His breath came in shallow bursts, a reminder of the illness that now controlled his life. For the first time in years, he let himself think of her, the daughter who might be his last chance. He reached for the phone with trembling hands and called his assistant. "Find the best investigators. Money's no object. I need them here tomorrow." The meeting the following afternoon was tense. 3 men in tailored suits sat across from him, their faces a mix of professionalism and intrigue. Johann explained the situation briefly, his voice steadied by necessity. "She's 18 now," he began. "I left her in the suburbs near the old highway. There's a locket around her neck, engraved, Kate. That's all I have." One of the investigators frowned, flipping through his notepad. "No records, birth certificate, anything to go on?" "No." Johann's voice grew sharp, but his expression betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. "If I had more, I wouldn't need you." They assured him they would begin immediately, but Johann could see the doubt in their eyes. Without documents, the trail was cold, decades cold. Yet he had no choice. His survival depended on finding her. Days turned into weeks with little progress. Johann grew weaker. The painkillers dulled his body, but nothing could quiet his mind. Each night, as he lay awake, the same image haunted him. A pair of wide, innocent eyes staring up at him from the bundle he had left behind. They were her eyes, Kate's eyes, imploring him even now. He began to dream of that night more vividly. The rain on his face as he walked back to the car, the cry that grew faint as he drove away. He had told himself it was necessary, that his life with Charlotte couldn't accommodate a scandal, but no justification held up under the harsh scrutiny of memory. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the shadows in the room deepened, Johann pulled the pendant from the drawer of his desk. He hadn't looked at it in years, but now it felt like the only tangible piece of the past he could still grasp. The silver had tarnished, but the engraving, Kate's initials, was still clear. "She might hate me," he murmured into the empty room, "and she'd be right to." The next morning, Johann called the lead investigator. "Double your efforts," he said hoarsely. "I don't care what it takes, just find her." The man hesitated, sensing the urgency in Johann's tone. "We'll do everything we can, Mr. Reynolds." As the line went dead, Johann slumped back in his chair, the pendant clutched tightly in his hand. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, his world was crumbling. For the first time in decades, he whispered the name he had refused to speak aloud. "Forgive me, Kate." The street outside Angel's small apartment was quiet, with only the soft hum of passing cars breaking the stillness. She stood by the window, gazing out at the world she had learned to survive in, her fingers absently touching the silver necklace at her throat. It was the only piece of her past that had survived alongside her, a gift from the woman who had raised her with love, sacrifice, and unshakable devotion. A knock broke her thoughts. Angel turned, her brow furrowed. Visitors were rare, and unannounced ones even rarer. She opened the door cautiously, her hand gripping the edge tightly. Standing there were two men in dark suits, their polished shoes a stark contrast to the scuffed wooden floor of the hallway. The older one stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Miss Angel, I apologize for the intrusion," he began. "We've been searching for you. We have information about your father." Angel stiffened. Her father. The word struck her like a cold wind. Her grip on the door tightened, the warmth of the room suddenly feeling distant. "You have the wrong person," she said, her voice flat. "I don't have a father." The younger man stepped forward, holding a folder. "Miss, this may come as a shock, but Johann Frank Trump." "Stop!" Angel cut him off sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I don't care who he is. He's not my father." The older man cleared his throat, his tone softening. "We understand this is difficult, but the necklace you wear, the one Julia gave you, belonged to your mother. Mr. Trump gave it to her." Angel's jaw clenched. Her fingers brushed against the necklace reflexively, a storm of emotions swirling beneath her calm exterior. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice cold. "Mr. Trump is gravely ill," the older man said, his gaze steady. "He has very little time left. He regrets what happened and wants to make amends." A bitter laugh escaped Angel's lips. "Amends?" she repeated, shaking her head. "You can tell him he's 18 years too late." She stepped back, the door closing with a deliberate finality. The echo lingered in the hallway, leaving the two men standing in silence. 3 days later, Johann stood outside Angel's apartment. The man who once commanded boardrooms with ease now leaned heavily on a cane, his breath shallow and labored. His illness had stolen much of his strength, but not his resolve. When the door opened, Angel stood before him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his. Johann felt his words falter. I'm sorry," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Angel crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Sorry?" she said, her tone cutting. "What could you possibly be sorry for? Leaving a baby on the side of the road? Letting someone else clean up your mess?" Johann swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the cane. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have no excuse, no words that can change what I did. But I've thought of you every day. I need you to know that." Angel's expression didn't soften. "You thought of me?" she asked, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "And what good did that do? Julia gave me a life. She sacrificed everything. You gave me nothing." Johann's shoulders slumped under the weight of her words. "I failed you," he admitted. "I failed both of you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to see you. Even if just once." Angel looked at him, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she stepped back. "You've seen me. Now leave." Johann hesitated, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Angel," he said softly, his voice almost pleading. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but please, please, let me try to make this right." Angel's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "You can't," she said firmly. "Go back to your life, Johann, whatever's left of it." She shut the door. Johann stood there, staring at the painted wood, his heart heavy with regret. Inside, Angel leaned against the door, her hand clutching the necklace. Her chest ached with the weight of emotion she couldn't name. In the silence, both father and daughter were left alone with the ghosts of what could have been. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves caught in the gentle wind. Angel sat on the edge of her small bed, her head bowed, fingers lightly touching the silver necklace around her throat. It was an anchor in the storm of emotions that had raged since the day Johann Trump stood on her doorstep. She had told him to leave, but his words lingered. They pressed into her heart, unwelcome, yet unshakable. "I've thought of you every day." The memory of his frail figure, his trembling voice, was a splinter she couldn't pull free. Her anger burned bright and sharp. How dare he seek her out after all these years, after leaving her to die? Yet alongside the anger was something softer, something she didn't want to name. Pity, maybe, or curiosity. She hated both. Her thoughts turned to Julia, the woman who had saved her, who had sacrificed everything to give her a chance at life. What would Julia say if she were here now? Would she tell Angel to forgive, or would she share her anger? Unable to sit still any longer, Angel rose and grabbed her coat. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped outside. She walked with no destination in mind, her feet carrying her through familiar streets. These streets had been her home once, a place of survival and hardship. She passed the alley where she used to sleep, its shadows unchanged. Her pace slowed as she neared the bench where an old man often sat, a small flask tucked inside his coat. He had been kind to her once, sharing scraps of bread on nights when she had nothing. "Evening, Angel," the man greeted as she approached, his voice rough with age. "Evening, Mr. Henry," she replied, sitting beside him. He studied her for a moment. "You've got that look about you. Heavy thoughts, huh?" Angel nodded, unsure where to begin. After a moment, she said, "I found out who my father is." Henry raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "He left me," Angel said, her voice tight. "Abandoned me when I was a baby, and now he's dying. He came to me, asking for forgiveness." Henry took a slow sip from his flask. "That's a lot to carry," he said finally. "I don't know what to do," Angel admitted. Her voice wavered. "Part of me wants to hate him forever, but another part of me, I don't know." Henry looked at her, his weathered face thoughtful. "Forgiveness ain't about them, Angel. It's about you. Holding on to hate. It's like holding a hot coal. Burns you more than it does them." Angel looked away, the weight of his words sinking in. "But what if they don't deserve it?" Henry smiled faintly. "Most don't. But forgiveness isn't something you give because they earned it. You give it to yourself." They sat in silence for a while. The city moved around them, distant and muted. Finally, Angel rose. "Thanks, Mr. Henry." "Any time," he said with a nod. The next day, Angel stood in front of an old house. The house belonged to Kate's mother, her grandmother. Thanks to the information about her mother from Johann, Angel had found her grandmother's address. She had visited her a week ago to tell her grandmother this important information. She took a breath and knocked on the door. An older woman answered, her hair a soft grey, her eyes sharp despite the lines of age. "Angel," the woman said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What brings you here?" "I need to know about my mother," Angel said, her tone steady. The woman hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. They sat in a small living room, the walls lined with photographs. Angel's eyes lingered on one of Kate, young and smiling, her features hauntingly familiar. "Kate was spirited," her grandmother began. "Stubborn like you. She loved deeply, and sometimes that made her reckless." Angel listened intently as the woman spoke of Kate's relationship with Johann, how their love had been intense but doomed from the start, how Johann had been caught between ambition and fear. He was afraid of what loving her would cost him, her grandmother said quietly, afraid of what people would think. And in the end, he made the worst choice. Angel's heart ached with the weight of these truths. She thought of Johann's trembling hands, his broken voice. For the first time, she saw not just the man who abandoned her, but the fear and weakness that had driven him. But forgiveness? That was a mountain she wasn't ready to climb. Not yet. As she left the house, the necklace around her neck felt lighter somehow, as if understanding her mother's story had lifted a piece of the burden she carried. Still, questions lingered, unanswered. And Angel knew her journey was far from over. The room was still, except for the faint hum of the oxygen machine by Johann's side. He sat in his favorite chair, once a symbol of his power, now merely a place to rest his failing body. His fingers traced the edges of Angel's letter, its words etched into his mind like a quiet reprimand. She had agreed to help him, but demanded a price. Her terms were clear. If he wanted her marrow to save his life, he would have to use his wealth for those who had none. Johann's lips tightened. He thought of Julia, the woman who had raised Angel with more love than he had ever given. He rose slowly, his cane supporting him as he crossed the room. There was no time to waste. The following days were a blur of meetings. Lawyers and advisors filled his study, each bringing documents and questions. Johann listened in silence, nodding when necessary, signing when prompted. His wealth, carefully built over decades, was now being divided. One morning he visited the first of many shelters his money would fund. The building was plain but warm, with freshly painted walls and new beds for the homeless. Johann stood in the doorway, watching volunteers move briskly through the halls. "Mr. Trump," said a woman, her voice kind, "thank you for this. It will change so many lives." Johann gave a small nod. "It's overdue," he said simply. As he left, he glanced back at the building. For the first time in years, something other than regret stirred in his chest. Angel followed the news from a distance. The headlines spoke of a billionaire turned philanthropist, a man giving away his fortune to help the needy. She read each article with a mix of disbelief and suspicion. When the results confirmed she was a match, Angel visited Johann's home once more. He opened the door himself this time, leaning heavily on his cane. "You've been busy," she said, stepping inside. He smiled faintly, his face pale but his eyes steady. "It's the least I can do." Angel folded her arms, studying him. "And what do you expect from me in return?" "Nothing," Johann said softly. "Only what you're willing to give." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Angel sighed, her voice quieter. "You can have the marrow, but don't think this changes anything between us." "I don't," Johann said. His gaze dropped, his voice filled with a humility she hadn't expected. "Thank you." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faintly of fresh paint. Johann lay on a bed, his face ashen but calm. Angel stood by the window, her back to him, her arms crossed tightly. "Angel," Johann called softly. She turned, her expression unreadable. "I know I don't deserve this," he said, his voice weak. "But you should know. I've never been more proud of anyone than I am of you." Angel's jaw tightened. She looked away, her fingers brushing the edge of her necklace. "Julia made me who I am, not you." "I know," Johann said. His voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor her." Angel didn't reply. Her shoulders stiffened as she turned back to the window, but her silence carried less anger than before. The surgery was a success. Johann's body responded well, though his strength returned slowly. He spent his days overseeing the shelters, ensuring the funds were used wisely. The man who once thrived on ambition now found purpose in giving. But the guilt never left him. Every meeting with Angel was a reminder of the years he had lost, the pain he had caused. She visited rarely, her words few, her eyes cautious. Johann never pressed her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Johann sat on his porch, watching the light fade. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Angel standing there, her face shadowed but her presence unmistakable. "I saw the new shelter today," she said. Her tone was neutral, but her words carried weight. Johann nodded, his voice quiet. "I'm glad." Angel hesitated, then moved to sit beside him. For a long time, they said nothing, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a wall. Johann glanced at her, his heart heavy with both hope and regret. He didn't know if she would ever forgive him, but for now, this moment was enough. The winter soft sunlight poured softly through the wide windows of Johann's penthouse. Now, it belongs to Angel. The once imposing walls, adorned with the trappings of wealth, seemed gentler in her presence. Angel walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers brushing against the polished wood of the banister, her gaze lingering on the faint scratches in the floors. Every corner of the house held the echoes of a life she had barely been part of, yet had now inherited entirely. Johann Trump had passed away 3 weeks earlier. His final days had been quiet, spent mostly in this very house under Angel's reluctant care. She had visited often, more out of a sense of duty than affection. Even as his illness consumed him, Johann had tried, haltingly, to forge a connection. There had been small, tentative conversations about her life, his regrets, and the choices that had shaped them both. In the end, it wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to help Angel make peace with it. She paused in front of the study, the room where Johann had spent countless hours poring over documents, orchestrating his empire. On the desk sat the will he had signed in trembling handwriting, leaving everything to her. She had stared at the words in disbelief when the attorney read them aloud. For years she had fought to survive, scraping together a life with little more than determination and Julia's love. Now she held more than she could ever have imagined. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. Angel wiped her hands on her jeans and headed to the front door. Outside, a small group of children waited with a woman in her mid-30s. The children, bundled in mismatched coats and scarves, chattered excitedly. "Miss Angel," the woman said warmly, "we're here for the donation boxes." Angel smiled, stepping aside to let them in. The dining room table was piled high with clothes, toys, and books. Over the weeks since Johann's passing, she had made it her mission to turn his wealth into something meaningful. The orphanage nearby, the shelter downtown, even struggling families she had met during her own hardest days, all had become part of her focus. "Take as much as you need," Angel said, helping the children sort through the items. A little girl with bright eyes and a wide smile held up a stuffed bear. "This one?" the girl asked, her voice shy. Angel nodded. "It's yours," she said softly, her heart squeezing as she watched the girl clutch the bear close. Once the group had left, the house grew quiet again. Angel returned to the study, sitting down at the desk. On its surface lay a small photo of Johann and Julia, both much younger. Julia's face, full of quiet strength, seemed to look right through Angel, as if asking her a question she had long avoided. Forgiveness. Angel leaned back in the chair, her fingers resting on the silver necklace she still wore. She had spent years wrestling with the anger and hurt Johann's choices had left her with. Even as he lay dying, she had found it hard to look at him without resentment. But something had shifted in those final days. Watching him struggle with his own regrets, she saw not just the man who had abandoned her, but one who had lived in the shadow of his own failures. Forgiving him hadn't been for his sake. It was for hers. "I forgive you," she had whispered over his grave, the wind carrying her words into the stillness. Now, as she sat in the house he had left behind, she felt the weight of those words easing her heart. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it hadn't hurt. It was about letting go of the chains that bound her to it. The afternoon sunlight grew warmer as Angel rose from the chair. She moved to the window and looked out at the garden where autumn leaves scattered across the ground. Johann's legacy wasn't in the wealth he had amassed or the empire he had built. It was in her hands now, and she would shape it into something Julia would have been proud of. As the day faded into twilight, Angel walked outside, her steps light against the cool earth. She paused under the oak tree where Julia used to sit with her sewing, imagining the way her mother's voice would have filled the air with songs and stories. "I'll keep my promise, Mama," Angel whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. With a renewed sense of purpose, she turned back toward the house, ready to face whatever came next. Life had taught her that love, compassion, and forgiveness weren't about deserving. They were choices that built a bridge from pain to peace. The house stood quiet behind her, but it wasn't a place of sorrow anymore. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the resilience of those who had loved her and the strength she now carried forward. Wow, what a journey Angel's story has been. A tale of heartbreak, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love and compassion can light the way forward. Angel's choice to forgive wasn't about letting the past off the hook. It was about freeing herself to build a brighter future, one filled with purpose, inspired by the sacrifices of those who truly loved her. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and soul. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.